Hi, I'm Roz from World Have Your Say. This is a download from the BBC. If you'd like to read more information and our terms of use, take a look at bbcworldservice.com/podcasts. Here's today's show.
We've heard the news from the BBC. Now it's your turn.
You can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say or get in touch via Twitter at BBC_WHYS.
Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hello there, welcome to the programme. Everyone's talking about rape, writes Hadley Freeman on guardian.co.uk. So why do so few of these commentators appear to have the first clue what it actually is? Well, the conversation's been driven by controversial comments from a pair of politicians in the US and the UK. We began discussing Congressman Todd Akin and his phrase, quote, legitimate rape on the programme earlier this week. George Galloway, an MP in the UK, has also been criticised for his description of the allegations in Sweden denied by Julian Assange. Not rape, says Mr Galloway, but bad sexual etiquette. Well, we've invited a group of people from around the world who've experienced rape to share their feelings on the conversation. I'm Ben James. If you want to join the discussion too, you can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say.
I'm Ayona Awan from South Sudan, and this is BBC World Have Your Say. To take part in this live debate, call country code 442031624242.
Well, let's start by letting our guests introduce themselves, starting in the studio here in London.
Hi, my name's Bridget, and I'm a volunteer with a organisation in London that's a grassroots organisation called Women Against Rape.
Hi, I'm Ashley Michelle. I'm in California. I'm an anti-rape activist, a survivor, and a patient care coordinator for the Women's Health and Birth Center in Santa Rosa, California.
Hi, I'm Esma, and I've written a few posts for AngryBlackLadyChronicles.com about my experience of being raped and then surviving it.
Hi, I'm Eve Ensler, and I'm a playwright and an activist and a survivor.
Well, welcome to the programme to all of you. Eve's speaking to us from the Democratic Republic of Congo at the moment, aren't you, Eve? So excuse the quality of the line there. But Eve, I know a lot of people have been reading the article you wrote about this on Huffington Post. Just tell us a little bit of what you wrote for those who haven't read it.
Well, I think, being here in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which, as many people know, is probably the most dangerous place on the planet right now to be a woman because of sexual violence. To then come home after a really intense day at City of Joy, which is this amazing place we built for survivors here to really turn their pain to power, to come home and then read this incredibly insane and idiotic article by Todd Akin. But what I think was more disturbing is that it reflects a mentality I actually see everywhere. And it certainly reflects the psyche of the GOP right now in America and everything we've seen go on in the last month there. So I to be honest, I didn't sleep that night, and I just sat up in a state of rage, in a state of sadness, in a state of just alarm. And I wrote a piece from my heart and from my body as a survivor, just asking and really addressing his clear lack of understanding of what it means to be raped, what rape is, what rape feels like, what rape does to you. And I think one of the most disturbing things that's been going on is how this discussion is being led by men when women are the victims and the survivors of rape, and women actually know what the experience of rape is. So I think that's what really drove me to write that piece.
Well, thanks for joining us on the programme. Eve, Ashley Michelle, Esma and Bridget, it's over to you really. We want to hear you talk to each other on this programme about your feelings on the conversation about rape as it is right now because of these stories, because it's being discussed lots online. Bridget, you start, and then anyone else do pick up when you feel you wish to. What strikes you most about what the discussion is at the moment on rape?
I would agree with what Eve's just said. It struck me first and foremost that we were listening to commentary from white male politicians who have, I would imagine, a very limited understanding of what rape really is. But my main feeling, commenting on particularly what's been going on in Britain, as in George Galloway commentary, is the stupidity of it and what it represents, which I would say is a systematic problem of the issues around rape. So we're talking about problems with the authorities in this country, particularly. We've got a 6.7% conviction rate, and I feel like these comments reflect that very well, because they kind of give the idea that actually rape is kind of funny to politicians. It doesn't actually matter that much. They give great lip service to it. They talk about how much money they put towards rape because they need to get women voters on side. Yet the authorities don't investigate rape properly. They don't collect the evidence. When rapists go to court, it's a kind of victimisation again of the survivor. So many women that come to us for assistance kind of say that going through the process of the court case was a kind of second rape almost. And that's what strikes me, is that this commentary is it is important, but it reflects something much more problematic. And I would say that's what I felt angry as a survivor myself, is the same way as Eve, and sad, but not surprised really, because this, Women Against Rape, my organisation, been fighting for women for rape, conviction rate going up, and a better investigation of rape for sort of 35 years, and really we've had limited success, and these comments reflect this very well, I would say.
I would agree, and I think that one of the bigger issues that we have is this is not new. The Talking Points memo posted an entry 2 days ago, which did a very long, critical, and thorough examination of the history that we have, particularly in this country, of rapists coming out, of politicians coming out and trying to define what rape is so narrowly. It excludes virtually 95% of all rape narratives. And there's not, as we were talking about before the show started, there hasn't been a real push for people to change that thinking away from the rape culture. And when we discuss comments like what Aiken is engaging in, what Galloway is engaging in, they are really trying to not redefine rape for clarity's sake. They're trying to redefine rape so as to completely minimize the frequency and occurrence with which it happens, which is the bigger problem, I think, in a society where an overwhelming majority of rape victims never come forward about their victimization in the first place.
Yeah, if I could jump in too, just real quick, there are now there are more people who are defending Aiken. They're not many, but the ones who are, I'm trying to write their names down so that I don't send them Christmas cards. But there's Brian Fisher, I think, was the latest one who is now likening Todd Aiken to being a rape victim because of what the liberal media is doing to him. And that I wanted to break my laptop, to be honest, when I read that, because this is the other thing that I find just obnoxious, is this comparison of all these things that are absolutely not rape in any way, shape, or form being compared to rape. And again, that shows that lack of sympathy for victims and survivors. I mean, I'm not sure that anybody will ever be able to understand what we have been through. And in order for them to understand that, the only way that they'd be able to do that is to, go through what we did, which I would never wish on anyone, ever, ever, ever. But I do think that if we can change people's mentality about what rape is and what it does to a person, because, I mean, this is something that happened to me when I was 19. I am now almost 34. This is going to stay with me for the rest of my life, no matter what I do. It took me years to accept that.
If I can jump in for a second too, I think what's being reflected here is something really deep. I think, one of the things I've experienced now traveling and working to stop rape for the last 15 years, and that's really all I do, a lot of what I do with my life, is I think a lot of men don't really understand what rape is. And I think that's what's really disturbing. The idea that, in the piece that I wrote, I just want to, just read a couple of lines. I said you use the expression legitimate rape as if to imply there was such a thing as illegitimate rape. Let me try to explain to you what that does to the minds, hearts, and souls of the millions of women on the planet who experience rape. It's a form of re-rape. The underlying assumption of your statement is that women and their experiences are not to be trusted, that their understanding of rape must be qualified by some higher, wiser authority. It delegitimizes and undermines and belittles the horror, invasion, desecration they experience. It makes them feel as alone and powerless as they did at the moment of rape. And I just want to say that I think one of the things that this whole controversy can hopefully open the door on is, A, that women who have been raped, which is about 500 million women on the planet, need to come forward now to tell their stories, to be bold about what's happened to them, to define what rape is once and for all, so we get away from forcible rape and legitimate rape and all these qualifiers of rape that keeps and sustains the rape culture.
I would agree with everything that's been said, and I think as a survivor myself, I often think about it in these kind of emotional terms as well. You know, it's something, you are right. I think Esma just said, you never get over it. It's something that stays with you forever, and these comments just make it feel like your experience is worth absolutely nothing, actually. And one thing I wanted my experience to be was something that would change for other people, but I think that, you know, the problem is the lack of practical kind of things that are actually happening. So, you know, this zealous, and I'm not getting into the Assange case, I don't know the ins and outs of it, so I don't want to comment on that too much. But what I do find fascinating is this zealous kind of following of him as a rapist, whether or not, you know, fair trial aside, whether or not, whatever happens with that.
And of course, we should just make it very clear that he denies the allegations against him.
Yeah, we should make, I find it completely bizarre how the governments are going after him when I meet women daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, for the last 7 years, whose rapists never receive that kind of zealous chasing down, getting them in court, getting them convicted. You know, this kind of stuff is fascinating, how the government will use it, and they'll use it as a nice, again, lip service to rapists, to rape victims, to women who've been raped. But the practical reality is, if you go and report a rape in this country at the moment, you're likely to be told that it's A, not going to get a conviction because rape is very hard to convict. Well, yes, it's very hard to convict if you don't do your job properly, if you don't collect the evidence, if you don't speak to witnesses.
Right.
But also that it's a jury's fault. Well, if a rape is not investigated properly, of course it's a jury's fault. And when I say it's a societal problem, but the really big problem, and I really feel strongly that this is something that must get out, is the problem with the authorities. And I know that in America it's probably the same thing.
Yeah. In America, I would say it's probably even... The issue with America is you have politicians and the common people in bed together, constantly propping up the rape culture, as we talked about. And to me, as I've mentioned before, as a birth advocate, what's most difficult for me to swallow is how we are now telling women who are deciding to keep their pregnancies that resulted from this conception that their experiences don't count and that their narratives are no longer valid. And that's an extremely bitter pill to swallow, because it takes so much out of these women to come and receive their services through our birth center and admit, yes, my child is the product of rape. I want to give birth to them in this setting, and I want to do it responsibly so that we can give them the referral to our on-site therapist. And for someone to tell them that they're pregnant because they weren't actually raped is beyond offensive. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of women in this county alone who've had children as a result of forcible, non-forcible, whatever adjective descriptor you want to apply to it, but at the end of the day, they did not consent. And politicians don't understand that, because especially politicians, they can't get pregnant.
Yeah.
I just want to say, this is Eve again. I think in terms of the authorities and everyone connected who could prosecute rapes or go, we're talking about patriarchy. We're talking about living in patriarchal systems in every single country in the world, which relies on violence as a mechanism to keep women in their place. And as long as patriarchy is not challenged and deconstructed, rape will be the primary method, as well as battery, as well as acid burnings, as well as female genital mutilation, which keeps women muted, undone, and in their place. We have an opportunity now for women to begin to come forward and speak out everywhere and really begin to deconstruct patriarchy at its roots. Because I think we can talk about authorities, but all of those authorities are patriarchal authorities and obey patriarchal ideology. And I think what's really important is that women take this cause, take this matter into their own hands, define what rape is, and insist that we, as the 500 million or 1 billion women on the planet who are raped and beaten in their lifetimes, that's a UN statistic, 1 billion, rise and begin to turn the situation around.
Sorry, it's Bridget again in London, but I want to come in there. I would agree with that. The only problem that I feel isn't at the moment is that we currently have a government that has representative women in it, supposedly, and yet actually the women in the government that, you know, should be trying to break down the patriarchy, hopefully, and kind of being vocal for women's rights aren't actually doing anything. They're sitting back and giving lip service again to this kind of financial, they've put lots of money into rape. This is something they're worrying about, and it's a big issue. Along with the fact that they are also, I mean, I'm just speaking from a London perspective, they're cutting hundreds of services which leave women in a very difficult positions. It leaves women in the position where they have to stay with violent partners, violent husbands. This kind of arresting of sex workers whilst not going after the Johns that have actually beaten them up. We're looking at a government here who does have women in it, and yet they themselves are not doing anything to make the situation better. So I hope Eve is right.
If I could just address that for a second. I don't think governments are going to be the agencies that ever change them. They're patriarchal institutions. I think activists are going to be what changes, and survivors. There's 1 billion of us on the planet. We will be turned around. I am not waiting for governments. I'm not waiting for the UN anymore. I'm not waiting for world leaders anymore. They have a vested interest in continuing patriarchy. What I'm seeing in the Democratic Republic of Congo and what I see with B-Day activists around the world is when we survivors, and there are so many of us, make a determination that we are going to reverse our destinies and the destinies of women on the planet, it will happen. We can't wait for anybody in government. You know, we've been waiting how many years for people in government?
Let me just jump in there, Eve, because I just want to tell you that, tell everyone that they're listening to World Have Your Say, that we're talking about the conversation about rape with people who've experienced rape. But you can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say if you'd like to speak to them, if you'd like to send your perspective into the programme. Now, Eve, Ashley, Michelle, Esma and Bridget, listening to you are a couple more guests to take part in this conversation, and I know that they're itching to get involved in it. And just like I asked you to introduce yourselves, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And let's start with our new guest in Johannesburg. Hi there.
Hello, this is Andy Kawa here. I'm a businesswoman and survivor. And I think that it is important for us to have a worldwide discussion on rape because of the scale and the intergenerational issues that are involved, and yet we don't seem to have come to any solution to this problem.
Andy, let me just go to Hartford, Connecticut as well, because there's one more guest waiting to speak to all of you there.
Hi, this is Haley Horzepa. Thank you for having me on today. I'm a writer and author of the book I Know Why They Call a Shell, and I do discuss this topic often on my website and focus on dealing with life after rape, because people don't typically realize how traumatic it is in the aftermath. It's something that some people never get over. And to add what you've said, one of your guests has said about the victimization of Aiken by the liberal media, I have to say it echoes one of the biggest problems that rape victims face, especially in the country I live in, but probably, across the world. Though his repeal, he said that he feels for rape victims. I really find it difficult for men who have never been rape victims, especially, to understand this trauma that is rape. Women are usually more empathetic, and our former governor of Connecticut, Jody Rell, described rape crime as a violence of the most personal and devastating kind, as brutal in its own right as murder. And I couldn't agree more with that statement. And my question is, why is it that in ancient Greece, Rome, and colonial times, even 14th century England, was rape a punishable crime on par with murder, and now rapists rarely see jail time? Why is that?
Because we've transitioned to patriarchy, like Eve was talking about. Hi, Haley. I'm Ashley Michelle. And we no longer value the role of women in making decisions such as whether or not they can consent to sex or terminate a pregnancy. We rely on male voices and cisgendered bodies in the status quo to decide those decisions for us. I would caution, and I hope this doesn't spawn too intense of a discussion, I would caution all of us to avoid suggesting that only women can be victims of legitimate rape. Yeah. There are male survivors out there, and although they cannot conceive, they cannot get pregnant, their narratives matter too. I also volunteer for After Silence, which is a message board dedicated to ending sexual violence, and some of our most profound, honest, amazing advocates are men. We have a man on staff, and I'd just like to make that plug there. It doesn't dissuade from the fact that our institutions are patriarchal and need to be taken down, but we cannot completely hope for change if we exclude half of the people that suffer from sexual violence.
If I could jump into, this is Esma. Hi, Haley and Andy.
Hello.
I would like to say, too, to all the men who are out there who are listening, we do need your help. We need you to stand with us, on this. This is so important that it's not, because if you want to shift the mentality as to what rape is and what it does, there are male victims. I've known a handful of them, this needs to be both genders coming together and standing up and taking all of this down. I mean, the laws in the United States, they really favor the rapist. They don't favor the victim. The burden of proof is always on us. That's why I could never go forward. I knew, that I had no proof. So I could go to court. I'd look like a fool, and that really needs to change, as does our perception of survivors. I'm told all kinds of different things, but one of the things is that I don't fit the bill, because I can talk about it, and I'm not bursting into tears or hysterics or whatever it is. It's so, we have a lot of educating to do all over the world, not just in the United States.
And please,
but, this is a worldwide problem, and it has been since probably forever.
Forgive me for jumping in there, just because we're coming up to the news headlines in 15 seconds from now. Do hold that thought, Andy, because I really want to develop that and hear everybody talk through what we've just heard. So back in a few minutes on World Have Your Say.
We've heard the news from the BBC. Now it's your turn.
You can post on facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay
or get in touch via Twitter at BBC_WHYS.
Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hi there, welcome back. We're talking to survivors of rape about the conversation about rape, prompted by comments from US Congressman Todd Akin and the UK MP George Galloway. Bongin Kosi listens to us in Zimbabwe and posts on Facebook, rape violates a woman in her entirety. It's not something to speak of lightly. Shaira in Los Angeles tweets, people like Akin are why rape victims are scared to speak out and why rapists get away with their crimes. Stephen has tweeted us from the Rocky Mountains, as someone born after rape, I say Todd Akin shouldn't step aside. That's what Stephen says. Tweet with the hashtag WHYS to contribute to the programme while you're listening to it.
This is Irene,
Eddie, and Nicholas
from Western Kenya
on BBC World Have Your Say. You can join the programme by calling the country code 442031624242.
And you've been hearing a conversation between Eve Ensler, between Ashley Michelle, Esma, Andy in South Africa, Hayley in Connecticut, Bridget here in London. I think we heard from Esma just before the news. Bridget, did you want to pick up on what Esma was saying?
Hi to those that have just joined us. I was kind of interested in what Esma, I was interested in what Esma was saying, just in terms of the fact that also I think it's kind of interesting that victims are scrutinised so much as well, when actually what they're doing is a really important public service by getting violent men off the streets. And this idea that it's easy to come forward and report rape, and that, you know, we want this, we want it to be easy, is ridiculous. Reporting rape, I didn't do it, but I would imagine is probably the hardest thing you can do. And then to feel that the rhetoric behind what the police are saying to you, what the CPS in our country are saying to you, is that they don't believe you, that they want you to fight your corner. Why were you raped? What were you doing that provoked you being raped? It really belittles what these rape victims are doing by coming forward. I mean, I find it really quite... I'm always so respectful of a woman that goes to the police, because when I hear about the experience of going to the police in this country, it sounds as horrific in some ways as being raped, because you are being totally told that your experience is not legitimate. And so I think it's amazing that we don't also celebrate those women that come forward and report it and say, well done, you're doing a brilliant thing. And I think that this commentary just adds to the idea that actually, you know, it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. Yes, it happens all the time, but it doesn't it doesn't add anything to the discussion, this commentary, actually. And I think this is good, that it's kind of provoking a more legitimate discussion around such a huge global systemic problem.
Yeah, I have kind of a question for all of you, because when I opened up to certain members of my family, I have not told every single person in my family about my experience, but when I finally opened up, I was scrutinized by my family, and I had the same experience with so-called friends of mine too. They didn't want to believe it, and I got questioned quite a bit, and I still on occasion will get that from people who know me well, people I'm related to, and I was just wondering if you guys had that same experience too.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
I know
I think that
for sure. And actually, the phrase I heard a lot in the weeks following was, you put yourself in a bad situation, because mine was an acquaintance situation when I was 18. And, you know, my initial thought has always been, now that I'm almost 10 years in the future from that, what situation did I put myself in that was so bad? I went over to the house of somebody that I had a passing acquaintanceship with. How many of us do that every day? And I think it really entrenched my PTSD. So I completely had that experience, and I did report it, and was threatened by the police that if I did not, if I didn't agree to report it further, they would not give me the prophylactics that I wanted, the treatment for potential STD exposure. And then after I agreed to report it, because I had been kowtowed after being violently assaulted, I was told if I did not agree to dropping the charges against this person, that I would actually be brought up on charges for filing a false police report. So I've seen both sides of it, and it's horrific. Almost worse than...
Can I just, jump in there? It's Bridget again. No. It's the false reporting thing is very interesting. This is something that we are seeing more and more in this country, is women who have come forward, reported their rape and don't get a conviction, then being tried for making a false allegation. We actually have worked with women who've been imprisoned for this. You know, in this country, women victims are being... the authorities are going after victims rather than the rapists now. So I just wanted to add that in as well, because that's one of our main campaigns at the moment, is to try and get the authorities to recognise that they're not even going after the violent criminals anymore. They're going after the women that come forward to report the rapes in the first place.
I think that one of the things I'd like, this is Andy here, one of the things I'd like to point out that has been discussed here is how we find that throughout the world there is a collective consensus of trying to diminish the seriousness of this crime that is rape. And usually it doesn't come in isolation. There's usually threatening of life. There's usually assaults and violence. And it is a serious crime. But diminishing it in any way legitimizes it and makes the perpetrators feel that it is okay, because there's always an argument around, is it or is it not rape? I think that we need to say enough is enough to rape. Enough is enough to the tolerance of rape.
I too only had circumstantial evidence, and most rape victims do have circumstantial evidence. It's a hard thing to process, and by the time it sinks in, you know, it's something you can't believe is happening to you, like many victims of traumatic events. And with the PTSD, people really associate that with war victim, you know, soldiers. They don't really associate that with rape victims, and the statistics are only 2% of reported rape crimes are actually falsified. But victim blamers love to use that as an excuse when we come forward, that, yes, she's lying, and this and that. And also, I wanted to comment on something Esma said about male rape victims. I do get some emails from male rape victims, and since rape victims in general are stigmatized and prejudged and have a scarlet letter, well, I've experienced that. You can only imagine how difficult it is for male victims, because in this country, we have homophobia, and male victims are even more isolated than female victims. And also to elaborate on what Bridget said, the victim does blame themselves a lot. And the situation I was in, I was underage drinking. I was doing something illegal. So for a very long time, I blame myself. It's my fault. You know, if I had followed the law, if I didn't put myself in that situation. And it wasn't until I went to rape counseling where my counselor said, I don't care if you're doing drugs, I don't care what you're doing. Nobody has the right to take your body and do that to you. I mean, no matter what you're doing, they don't have the right to assault you.
This is Eve, if I can just jump in for a second. You know, I think one of the most profound impacts of rape is shame. And I think that often the victim of rape carries the shame of the perpetrator and ends up walking around with their harm and their shame. And part of what we have to do in fighting rape is give the shame back to the perpetrator. So often I meet women, and one of the things I see at City of Joy with the incredible women we have here who have been through atrocities I can't even articulate. One of the things I see through the process of their journey is that they can't look at people when they come here because they're so ashamed. And the thing is, the way the world is created is that when a woman is victimized and when a woman is raped, she is made to believe on every level that it's somehow her fault. That is the genius of the rape domination. And I think part of the work of breaking the silence is to give the shame back, and to release the shame, and to put the shame on the perpetrator, and to out rapists, and to call out who is the rapist, and to stop protecting rapists. And that goes for the rape of men, and that goes for the rape of women. It goes for the rape of all people.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I usually make an example that if you take a diamond and put it in a pit toilet, that is just where dung is, and leave it there for 20 years, if you take it out and shine it, it is still a diamond. And that is the encouragement I give to women. But I think that going back to the issue of silence and the taboo of talking about rape is something that makes victims fearful because there is a stigma attached to it. For an example, I've had somebody saying, you know, when you are raped, you are now done. So it means that any man can come. It's like they say, when is your next turn? Unfortunately, those kind of stigmas make people afraid. I think there is a fear of even reporting because we're talking about sometimes something that happens within families, within communities, within spaces that we know. Sometimes it can be a stranger. But why is it that the perpetrators most of the time run free and the victims are the ones who deal with the aftermath of fear of being insecure, of all the psychological trauma, whilst the perpetrators are running free, which is a problem. And I think that we need a collective consensus throughout the world to say zero tolerance to rape, zero tolerance to any attitude that says rape is okay.
I think it all comes down to them not valuing women, really. I mean, I think that's where we need to start. We're not viewed as equals.
I think it's a little bit of that. It's also, this is Ashley Michelle again. I think it also comes down to people wanting to inoculate themselves from the epidemic of violence we have in the world. And it's a false security at best, because there is no act of prevention against sexual violence except to completely deconstruct patriarchy and understand that a man or a woman is not entitled to be your sex object. And until that changes, we won't see a decrease in the number of incidents of sexual violence. One of the things that we do here at the birth center is we do ask women if they have a history of violence, and we allow them to be very open-ended about it, because we don't want them to be shamed. We want them to have the birth experience of their choosing, which we've found over and over again they can't have if they're holding on to this. And people don't realize this, of how long and entrenched rape can affect you and ultimately be. We have women whose entire birth is thrown off because they've never been able to push that shame back onto their perpetrator. They've never been able to own their experience. And that's one of the reasons why our midwives will sit down with them and discuss it with them, so that they know it's not their fault. And their baby is not something to be ashamed of if they choose to keep it and they want to birth it. That's what's going to need to happen to take that narrative back and to really turn the patriarchy on its head and challenge this culture of violence and rape.
This is...
And also, if I can support that Eve again, and something that Andy said. Hi, Andy, by the way. It's great to be talking with you.
Hi, Eve.
I just want to say that my experience about breaking taboos and breaking these stigmas is the only way to do it is to do it. But really the way to do it is to do it in numbers. And I think one of the things I'd just like to throw out is that there's a huge action happening on February 14th, 2013, called 1 Billion Rising, where there is a call that the 1 billion women on the planet and all the men who love them walk out of their jobs, walk out of their schools, walk out of their homes, and get their posses and dance, and declare themselves the victors, declare themselves survivors, declare themselves the people who are going to reverse and not carry the shame and not carry the stigma and put it back on the perpetrators and where it belongs. And if you're interested in becoming a part of this, go to vday.org and sign up and organize dance strikes everywhere you are in this world, so that every survivor and everyone who loves a survivor walks out and stands up, strikes, and dances until we shake the earth back into rightness.
Can I? This is Bridget in London. That sounds fantastic. I've been reading about that, but I just also wanted to talk about, and I'm going back to the authorities again, because I really believe this is where the problem lies, and this is what we're concentrating on in Women Against Rape. With the women that we have worked with, the shame has been pushed back onto the perpetrator when they have got a conviction, when that person has been convicted of rape, when that person is known to be a rapist and is therefore known to be a dangerous man. This is one of the best ways women can... They'll never recover. Women will never recover from rape once they've been raped. I know this as a survivor myself. But you learn to live with it, and you learn to live with it when it is also made clear that the society you live in doesn't accept that that's okay and that that person is behind bars. I feel very, very strongly that we have to send this message out to the authorities. They need to change. They need to stop giving rapists excuses. You know, it's okay to rape if you're married to her. It's okay to rape if she's been drunk or she's used drugs. These things have to massively change, and I really believe that patriarchy, yes, I believe that is a massive problem, but I do think the authorities in all of the countries we're talking about, and I'm sure this is true in African states where it's even huger problem. That's the change that needs to come. These people need to lose their jobs. They need to be held up to account and said, you didn't do your job properly, you aren't convicted rapist, and that is your job, and you are not doing it, so you will lose it in the same way as anyone else would lose a job. You know, the fact that a politician in this country or in America can say those comments and feel it's okay to say them, really, that's kind of what it comes down to. You know, these were not said mistakenly and someone caught them on a tape recorder. These were said very openly. There is a really serious problem, and I agree with the global rising of women and the zero tolerance to rape. I do, but I do think it starts in the countries with the authorities, and I banged on about this, throughout this program. But this is the thing that really makes a change. Rapists will stop raping when they know that they will be punished, and they are not being punished. And it's not rape victims, rape victims speaking out and explaining what's happened to them and putting women on their guard so they know what to do when they are raped is brilliant. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the authorities are held accountable for what they are doing incorrectly, because they are the ones that are making this rape culture continue.
Can I share with you all some of the comments that people are sending in as they listen to our conversation on World Have Your Say, or rather, your conversation on World Have Your Say? Catherine posts on Facebook, I commend those who are sharing their personal experiences. There's never an excuse for force of this kind. It's very disappointing that those brave enough to seek justice often are re-victimised by the current systems. Brian posts, without the burden of proof, it's not a fair trial. Let's have a look here. Karin in Sweden posts on Facebook, the toughest comments I got after being raped by a male colleague actually came from female co-workers. And Ladybird posts, I'm a very liberal female who's all too familiar with the problems with rape, but this presentation's full of unhelpful and accusatory rhetoric. I'm very frustrated that this panel's not only made up of only women, but it's also participating in extreme reverse sexism. Well, the reason that we chose to invite a panel of women, Ladybird, thanks ever so much for your feedback, is that the conversation began with Todd Aiken's comments specifically about rape and abortion. But thank you very much for the feedback. But that accusation of extreme reverse sexism, does anyone want to pick up on that based on the conversation you've had so far? How about you, Ashley Michelle?
Well, I empathize with where Ladybird is coming from, because I do think when we engage in dialogues about rape survival, we have a tendency to exclude men. However, it is because of the power dynamic that it's easy to make that schism in the first place. Let's not ignore the fact that male privilege is not only prevalent in society, it's rampant. It's easy to talk about women rape victims, not because their stories are more tragic or their stories are more plentiful, but arguably it happens with frequency, and women are indoctrinated from cradle to grave that rape is the greatest thing that they can ever face. It's the most terrible thing that can happen to them. Again, it's not at the exclusion of men. I think there's some validity to the comment, but it's completely dismissing the fact that I spoke out about male activists. Ezra also spoke about men, and so did Haley. So it's not fair to say that this entire panel is biased, and even the comments that could arguably be strewn as exclusive in nature are not being done because they're saying all men are rapists. It's merely pointing out that patriarchy primarily benefits men, and even male victims of rape who have their own set of stigma that they have to face as males will enjoy a certain amount of privilege over female rape victims for no other reason than they were born male in this status quo.
I'll come in again. It's Bridget in London. I would agree with everything that's just been said, but I would also like to point out that, and I haven't said it, but we have worked with men closely. We work with a male men's group who also support our work, and we work with them closely. We also have worked with survivors who have had men who've brought them forward, men who've fought their cases, husbands, fathers, brothers, boyfriends. So I think I understand why it's very easy to throw sexism, into this conversation. But I would like to make it clear that I think that actually it's more powerful when men are involved, which is why we have to be careful with this this current feeling, this kind of current conversation where men are not included in many feminist networks, particularly in London. It is important that men are involved. It's not a sexist thing. It's just our experiences. And I'd like to say that the men I've worked alongside with have been just as passionate about rape as the women I've worked alongside.
I would say that...
I couldn't agree with you and Ashley more, but one of the things that I've realized, and actually myself, when I was first, dealing with this, people still think rape is about sex and, sexual desire. Men and women still have that misconception. So that is one thing I get from people a lot. I did write an article about coming together, and we need men to fight this and, this new feminist movement. And the responses I got from men, either they were completely with me and, really supportive, or they were, saying that, feminists are man-haters and all this stuff, that stereotypical, stuff that you would hear. But I have found a lot of men to be supportive, but a lot of people still don't even understand what rape really is. I may say something here. I don't feel like we're having a sexist conversation at all. I feel like we're a group of women survivors of rape, and we're talking about the nature of rape. And unfortunately, 95% of the violence done against women is done by men. It doesn't mean by any means that all men are rapists. There are many, many, many good men. When I wrote my article 2 days ago, thousands of men, thousands, wrote me emails and tweets thanking me and saying they were with me and they were in solidarity. And tell men, and I really mean this firmly, join us in solidarity and fight to end violence against women to the degree and with the passion and ferocity. We are doing it. We're not going to end rape. But I don't think to characterize a conversation a group of women are talking about rape is sexist. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's true. And I think, unfortunately, we live in a world where rape is prevalent. That does not mean all men are terrible, all men are rapists, we're bashing men. We're talking about particular men who are committed. And if 1 billion women on the planet are beaten and raped, that's a lot of women being beaten and raped, which means there's a group of men participating in that. And I think we need to hold them accountable, as Bridget's been saying throughout this conversation. But I think we need to separate that out from condemning all men.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's dangerous to suggest that it's a massive problem with all men. This is a specific group of men that are getting away with this.
And can I just ask this, in the few minutes we've got left before the end of the programme, we sort of touched on it just now, but it would be interesting to hear more in the couple of minutes we've got left. And I think Andy was trying to come in there to maybe answer this. What is it that people don't understand about rape if they've not been there, male or female, Andy?
I think that people don't understand the violence that is involved in it and the aftermath of rape. And also the fact that it does not only affect the victim, it affects the community, it affects friends, it affects a lot of people. And the cost of it to the person, because it has an effect of not only the productivity, it has an effect on the psychological effect to it. I think what I'd like to say, given that we started this whole program around leadership, is the importance of actually having very strict and clear judicial systems and also investigative systems, because we're talking about when rape has happened. Now, if at all there's no proper investigation, there can be no case, because the police are the gatekeepers to that justice. However, before the rape even happens, we need to be asking ourselves, what kind of society are we living into, and what kind of children are we bringing up who become rapists? And I think so it doesn't only become, it becomes a society issue, where starting in the family, moving on to communities, moving on to police, to government, and leadership is key once rape has happened. And I think that as a survivor, the struggles that you get, if at all, you know that a case is not investigated, and that nobody is interested, because it is such an everyday occurrence. That is saddening, because you know that it's going to happen again. It will happen to your mother, it happens to children, it happens to boys, it happens to same-sex partners. So gender-based violence is something that, as the world, we need to say, we cannot tolerate this and put the perpetrators behind bars instead of having the people who are supposed to be free locking themselves up.
Andy, thank you very much indeed for ending our conversation on World Have Your Say. Eve Ensler, thank you very much. Thanks also to Ashley Michelle in California, Esma also in the US, Hayley in Connecticut, Bridget here with me in London. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in the programme. The podcast will be available via facebook.com/World Have Your Say if you perhaps only caught the end of a really fascinating discussion. EMS tweets, rape is a crime that can and does leave victims with a life sentence. You can carry on discussing this issue at facebook.com/World Have Your Say and by tweeting with the hashtag WHYS.